Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is an HP Pavilion x360, which is an 11.6-inch touchscreen notebook which runs Windows 8.1 and sells for about $400. It's an inexpensive device. It's relatively portable at about 3.1 pounds, and it has an Intel Pentium Bay Trail quad-core processor. It's not the fastest device you're likely to find, but it also has a relatively low starting price of $400 for a model with 4 gigs of RAM and 500 gigs of storage. This is a model that HP loaned me to test that actually has 8 gigs of RAM, sells for about $475. And it's not just a notebook, it's also a tablet. You can fold back the screen all the way, and then keep folding until it's all the way on the other side, and you've got yourself a tablet. Now, in tablet mode, it's 3.1 pounds is a little bit heavy, so lifting it like this takes a little bit of extra effort, but you can place it down on your lap and sort of hold it facing you to surf the web or do other things while you're watching TV. You can also stand it up in a stand mode using the keyboard as a sort of kickstand, or tent mode, where you sort of prop it up like, well, a tent. Now, HP is hardly the first company to come up with this sort of design. It's very reminiscent of Lenovo's IdeaPad Yoga or ThinkPad Yoga designs. Asus, Dell, Toshiba, others have all come up with similar ideas recently. And in general, these things tend to be a little bit heavier and more awkward than a dedicated tablet device, but always having the keyboard handy might make it worth it for some people. And if you think of it as sort of a notebook that also happens to have a keyboard, or a notebook that also happens to have a tablet mode as opposed to as a tablet that has a keyboard, I think it makes a lot of sense in certain situations. That said, there are a couple of quirks here that make this one something that you might want to pause before you go out and spend your money on. So for instance, let's go ahead and take a look at some applications here. And you'll see that as I sort of move the screen from side to side, it doesn't look so bad. But the angles, it can be kind of hard to see when you tilt backward and forward. Another thing that I've noticed is when you're using it in notebook mode, if you want to sort of reach up and touch the screen wobbles. And that's not a huge problem when you're holding it as a tablet and using it on your lap. But if you wanted to, say, reach up and reposition windows and tap the screen and bring up the on-screen keyboard and do different sorts of things like that, a shaky screen can make all of those things a little bit more difficult. So, not a huge fan of the viewing angles, not a huge fan of the way the screen wobbles, but if you just use it as a keyboard and touchpad kind of device or external mouse, you're not likely to run into too many problems on that front. Let's go ahead and close the case and take a look around the edges so I can show you what we've got. There's a power button and volume buttons. You'll notice that they're both on the sides here, and that's something that comes in handy when you're using it in tablet mode. USB port, headset jack, and a vent. While it does have a 7.5 watt low power processor, it does generate some heat, and that blows out through the vent. So you'll hear a little bit of noise from time to time and feel a little bit of warmth there. On the other side, there's an SD card slot, HDMI, Ethernet, and power adapter. There's 2 more USB ports. There's a total of 2 USB 2.0 ports and 1 USB 3.0 port. On the bottom, stereo speakers, and it has Beats audio. And the speakers are angled here so that the way this sort of is designed is it tilts up here. Speakers wind up not really quite pressing down against the table or your lap or whatever. They're just sort of floating there. So the sound's going to be a little bit more clear than on some laptop speakers. That said, don't let the Beats audio fool you. These are still laptop speakers. They're not extraordinarily loud, and there's not a lot of bass. So if you really want to do a lot of listening to music or other things, then you're going to want something like external speakers or external earphones. Now, in tablet mode, it's kind of a funny looking device because the lid and the base don't necessarily line up quite right here. And so it can be awkward. It looks a little awkward and it feels a little awkward if you try to hold it from this edge. So holding it from this side works a little bit better. In terms of performance, it's relatively speedy. It does have the same Bay Trail architecture as Intel's Atom chips, which you might find in tablets or low-cost notebooks, but it performs pretty well. And the only thing that really differentiates it from some of the other Intel Atom-based systems that I've tried, or Intel Bay Trail systems, is that it does not support quick sync. So when using Handbrake to encode videos, for instance, it's generally pretty fast with H.264 encoding or FFmpeg encoding. It doesn't do quick sync encoding, so most of the time you're probably not going to notice that, but that is something to keep in mind. It also does not get stellar battery life. It has a 29 watt-hour battery, and it gets around 4 hours of runtime. It's not absolutely horrific, but it's also not great, especially when other Bay Trail-based systems I found can get substantially better battery life. So here we are watching a YouTube video. You'll notice again, if I tilt the screen back too far, you can't even really see what's happening. When the angles are okay, though, it looks fine, and it doesn't have a problem with HD video playback. So if you can live with the limitations of a screen that wobbles, battery life that's less than stellar, and limited viewing angles, for $400, it is a tablet, it is a notebook, it does perform pretty well, and I've been using it for a couple of weeks to do blogging, editing audio, video, other files, and it works pretty well for basic tasks as long as you manage your expectations. If the 4 hours of battery life concerns you, it does have a relatively compact charger. It's not a huge power brick, but it's also not the smallest thing you've ever seen. The battery is not going to be easily user upgradable. If you try to open up the case, you might be able to pull it out, but it's not a standard battery that you can just pop a new one in. The 2.5-inch hard drive you might be able to replace, but opening up the case could potentially void your warranty, especially if you break anything on the inside. It's not a very easy case to open up. And that's about it for your basic features. In terms of something more advanced, let's go ahead and restart it, and I'll show you one more thing here. As I said, it does ship with Windows 8.1 software, and it has UEFI boot mode enabled. But if we go in to the boot settings, oops. We can go to System Configuration, Boot Options, and enable support for Legacy Boot. So by doing that, I was able to boot Ubuntu and run other Linux-based operating systems using an external DVD drive. Another nice thing here you'll notice is that it actually supports in the system settings, system configuration settings, supports touchscreen options here. So if you don't want to use the keyboard or can't use the keyboard for some reason, you can actually use these buttons for up, down, escape, enter, and F5, F1, F10, etc. So with Legacy Boot Mode enabled, you are still able to boot into Windows 8.1, but you can boot from other operating systems. When Legacy support is disabled, I was not able to find an easy way to boot into other operating systems. So there you go. It also supports network boot, and if you want, there's an option in here to make sure the fan is not always on. You can enable or disable virtualization, Intel Smart Connect technology, and action keys mode toggle. And what that is if you look at the keyboard here, you'll notice that not only do we have a nice wide touchpad down here that supports multi-touch gestures normally, not in this setting, but above the keys you've got your usual function keys that have volume, brightness, media playback, airplane mode, and so forth. And while most laptops you have to hold a function button while you press one of those, here you press mute, or press F6 and you get mute. You would hold F9 and press that same button to actually trigger an F6 action. If that's the behavior you want, you can come in here to the setup utility and instead of using action keys mode, switch it to disabled, and then you reverse the behavior of those function keys. So anyways, there's a quick look at the Hewlett-Packard Pavilion x360 convertible notebook / tablet with a Bay Trail processor. Sells for about $400 and up. If you want long battery life, it's not necessarily the best option. If you want thin and light tablet, it's not necessarily the best option. But if you're looking for a decent performing device that has a keyboard that works pretty well and supports Linux, you can definitely do worse. One thing to note is when I did run Ubuntu, out of the box the touchscreen was not supported. That might just be a configuration option or configuration problem. So you might have better results than I did, but when I was testing it, I wasn't able to get the touchscreen to work in Ubuntu. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing.